for years, I felt completely stuck with alcohol. I felt like this is just what it's going to be. Like, I'm just going to go down this road. And then something changed. And when that thing changed, and it wasn't a massive thing, it was a little thing, it was like this little bit of hope. And I followed that and I kept going. And that is eventually how I was able to put it behind me. And so that's what I want to talk about in today's video. I've had several of you reach out and be like, hey, what's your story? Like, what is this? Tell us about you. Like, where did this come from? What sort of experience do you have? And so I wanted to make this video. This is going to be longer than a lot of my other videos. But just to tell you the story, right? To bring you through the journey that I was on, what it was like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to just talk about like how this process goes. So, you know, I started drinking heavily when I was in college. Like a lot of people, you know, it was party central. I didn't really drink in high school. As a matter of fact, I think I had my first beer the day I graduated high school. But holy shit, did I love it. Like, I loved it. And so as I was at school, I started using it like a lot of people do, right? Like to cut through that social anxiety, or it's like a thing to do with your buddies on a weekend. And, you know, at first, I remember my freshman year, it'd be like one night a week, right? Like maybe Friday night, maybe Saturday night. Like that was it. Then the rest of the week, I just kind of like went about my business, and then Friday or Saturday came again, and then I did it again. And I lived it like that for a while. But then, you know, I had some stuff going on. I had some sort of like mental and emotional upsets, as everyone does. And I remember one day thinking like, oh, well, like, why don't I just have a drink, right? Like I was feeling bad, and I'm like, oh, I'll have a drink tonight. And that's, I think, when the seed got planted that like, oh, I don't have to feel those bad feelings. I can turn them off. And that was really the way that it felt. And I still stayed pretty like loosey-goosey with it throughout college. Although all the way throughout, like it started off one night a week, and then eventually it was 2 nights a week. And then eventually it's like, you know what? Like we never see, you know, our friends, because I had friends in lots of different sort of friend groups. And so everyone kind of went their own ways on weekends. So Friday and Saturday night, I might see some of them. But then I'm like, well, what if I had people over on Tuesday night? Before I knew it, especially up into senior year, we were drinking every night, and I was drinking heavily. Like I was known for drinking pints of scotch. Like I would have a pint glass, like a lot of people would have beer. Mine would be scotch on the rocks. Yeah, it's weird to even think about now, but that's what I used to do. And for the most part, it was fun, and it was regular, and it was starting to weigh on me. And I know looking back now that a lot of the depression and stuff that I felt was because of that, because of the drinking. But then there was one precipitating event, and really an exchange with someone else where things just took in a different direction. And what happened was I was in a long distance relationship. I got dumped. It was kind of sudden. It was kind of unexpected. And I was crushed. I was 3 months away from graduation. All of my plans revolved around this person, you know, and, I just felt like totally lost, like the rug got pulled out from underneath me. And so this happens, and I didn't even know what to do with myself. It's hard to even describe this feeling. Like it was partially empty. It was partially lost. I don't know. But I was just kind of wandering around like, what do I do? And my best friend at the time put his hand on my shoulder and said,
"Don't worry, Scotty. We'll get drunk every night from now until graduation."
And I think it was in this process, it was in this time frame when alcohol fully tipped from, you know, something fun and something I did at parties and maybe something I had kind of an unhealthy relationship to like the full on unhealthy, like using it to change the way I feel. And that's what we did, right? Every single night through graduation, we did that. And even graduation night, like every night we got wasted. Fast forward, and after graduation, I moved to New York City. And I don't know how many of you have lived in a big city alone before, but there is a special type of loneliness that happens when you're all alone in a crowd of people. So I'm there in a city of whatever it is, 8-9 million people, and I'm living in a basement in Queens, and I know nobody. And, you know, I had coworkers and I had friends, and, you know, it was okay, but man, it was lonely. And I was still hurting from being dumped. And so that was another place where my brain was like, oh, well, if this worked for being sad when you got dumped, maybe it's going to work for being lonely when you move to New York City. And so I started drinking because of it. And you know what? It felt like it worked. It felt like it worked. And it didn't stay dark for very long. Eventually I met someone, got in a relationship with them. Drinking eased up a little bit because I was happier, right? I wasn't like trying to like change my emotions as much. And, eventually I moved out of New York City with them, and I moved up to Maine. And I did a lot of things. I'm cutting through a lot of things here, but like I moved to northern Maine or central Maine, which really wasn't for me. It was like a little bit too rural. And so like I started having problems there. And then like I got this job that was really stressing me out, and the relationship I had was kind of, we were, going through things. And each of those times, for each of those things, alcohol was a thing I could reach for. Alcohol was a thing I could grab when I had what seemed like an intractable problem. Like, I left New York City and I moved up to the middle of friggin' nowhere. Like, that bummed me out. I could grab a drink. And I remember one time too, and this was really crazy. And I think she ended up being my first wife, but I think she was a girlfriend at the time. I remember her saying something to me, like, because we had another friend, we knew someone else who was like reaching for substances to like change the way they felt. And I remember them saying to me something along the lines of, you and this other person use these substances to change how you feel. Like, is that good? Is that a good thing? She wasn't like accusatory or anything. And I remember really hating that question. I remember like that question just really, it made me mad. It made me mad, but it made me mad because they were pointing right at something that I kind of knew and I was kind of hiding. And that really describes the next few years of like, normal ups and downs of life, right? We bought a house and then we sold that house and we moved down here to the Portland area and bought a house down here and, had a kid. It was fantastic. And I used alcohol to change that, to kind of help me move through these things. And there were times that I'd go out with friends and I'd party. And then there were other times that, I'd just stay home and get drunk. But it pretty soon turned into like an every night thing. And nothing was like quote unquote wrong in my life. Like I wasn't, I wasn't losing jobs. I didn't get DUIs, all these horror stories, but I knew in the back of my mind, and there was a lot of effort put into cramming that thought down. And the reason is that I couldn't imagine my life without it. Like I remember very clearly folding laundry in my old house one day, and I was thinking about, it was like 4:00 on a Sunday or whatever. And I was, doing that thing that we can do on Sunday nights where you just get all bummed out about the next day, right? Some people call them the Sunday scaries. And I'm doing this to myself and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh man, I should go get a drink. And then I also remember thinking, that's not going to help anything. And then I had this like fight with myself. And this is one of the first times I can remember. It's kind of that angel and demon, fight on your shoulders of like, yes, you should. No, you shouldn't. Yes, you should. No, you shouldn't. And it was just so clear to me, like, oh, this is not good. This is not good. Now, I chose to have a drink then, actually. And again, crammed that thought down. So I spent time doing that, and, life was life. I had a kid. She's wonderful. She's 15 now. And then things took another turn. That relationship started to fall apart, and it started to become obvious that, things were getting worse and worse and more difficult for both of us. And then eventually, we had a conversation, and the decision was it's time to call it. Like, we're going to get a divorce. That was such a disorienting thing for me. No one gets married thinking they're going to get divorced, but like, I never thought I was going to get divorced. I thought like we'd figure out how to make things work. I never thought I'd be moving out of this house and leaving my then wife and daughter there. And it was the beginning of a real time of upheaval for me. And alcohol came along for that ride, and I started leaning on it even more. And so I found myself sitting in my apartment drinking a ton more. Now, I didn't do it like when my daughter was with me. I wouldn't do it, or I'd have one or two, but I wouldn't like go crazy. But on the nights that she wasn't there, I could easily put away half a bottle or 3/4 of a bottle of scotch, you know, and I did this for a while, you know. And so that started to become much more of a pattern, and things became much more heavy. And then I started to notice that like anytime there was like a little bit of an upset, right? There was a little bit of a stressful thing, like, oh, you got a tax bill, or, you know, something went wrong at work. Any of those little stressful things, the very first thing I had was like, I should get a drink. And fast forwarding even more, I eventually met someone, and this person is my now wife, my second wife. She's incredible. And that alcohol, it was funny because like the drinking was like on the negative side of things, of like the hurt and the pain and the frustration and the worry and the uncertainty of like what's going to happen to me. But then also the drinking came along for the fun and the celebration. And suddenly I had this person to hang out with, and, you know, she liked the movies I liked, and we like to talk about politics. And like to this day, we can just sit down and talk for hours. And so that's what we did. And then alcohol became like this celebratory thing. And again, I was still putting it down every single night. Now, at the same time, you know, I had this situation happening where my daughter was living separate from me, and so I wasn't seeing her every day. And, you know, at the time she was just turning 2. It was a struggle. It was a real struggle. And there was a lot of pain, even in the midst of this wonderful new relationship. There was a lot of pain, and I was still reeling. And my job was tough for me. You know, my background is in engineering. And so like I have an engineering degree, but to be honest with you, like I tried so many different angles in engineering, and none of them really fit because they weren't really me. But I was dealing with that, and I was trying to figure out like, how do I do this? Like, how do I make a change? And so my girlfriend and I at the time, we made the move. We went down to Boston. And so we were down there, and I, you know, had 2 different jobs while I was down there. All the while, you know, traveling back and forth to get my daughter for weekends. And it was an adventure. I'll tell you, it was a hell of a 2 years. But during that entire time, like I was uncomfortable. I couldn't get settled. You know, part of it was that the North Shore of Boston just wasn't my bag. But a larger part of it, I think, was truly the fact that like I wasn't allowing myself to process emotions, that like things were coming up for me and things that were difficult for me, and I was using alcohol just to drink, just to cram them down, you know. And that was the process. That's how I dealt with it. You know, this Sunday afternoon thing I brought up, like I so clearly, it's funny, like sidebar, just recently was down around where we used to live. And I drove by a liquor store I used to go to, and I got that old familiar feeling. Now, it's been 8 years since I've drank anything, but it was like, oh, like I just remembered that like heavy feeling, like I had to do this. All right, this is a perfect place to leave off for part 1. Part 2 will be coming soon. But let me just say one thing. You know, I mentioned at the top of this video that there was one thing, one little bit of hope, that little bit of light. You can find that for yourself. Watching videos like this, listening to other people's stories, that's what does it, right? So keep doing that. And come back next week, and I'll be posting part 2 of this story, which is going to take us from where we are now all the way up until today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I'll be back soon with another video.